All right, how's everybody doing?
Right, how's everybody doing? Okay, good.
Hi there, your audio is on, whoever that is. Um, Good, okay. So I've kind of got a freeform one tonight. What I wanted to talk about was because we have a group working on the ecological imperative and a group that is working on uh, the life cycle assessment. So I figured it would be a good idea to talk about some of the new stuff that's going on in the area of kind of retail consumer products, particularly in the area of clothing. Okay, so I want to talk about some things that I know personally that are going on, some groups that I'm working with or starting to collaborate with. And then I also want to just highlight some of the big stories or the big initiatives that certain groups are working on right now. So yeah, let's march on forth. So one of the biggest, you're all familiar. I think a fair amount of you are familiar with life cycle assessment. Um, if not, basically life cycle assessment is the process of looking at the life cycle of a product or service from its inception through to its conclusion and through when it's finished at its end of life. So sometimes they call that cradle to cradle design or cradle to cradle analysis. In other cases, uh, it's a well to wheel analysis for hydrocarbons, for gas and so forth. But often, I mean, one of the big groups or people that have worked in this area uh, is, um, is the folks that wrote the book Cradle to Cradle. So I'm just going to share that link right here. Um, if you haven't read this book and you're interested in this area, it's by a guy named William McDonough, and this is their website. And he's actually, I believe, an urban designer. I'm not sure. I know he's in design, either architecture or urban design. So McDonough is a big thinker in this area, and quite some time ago, he got together with his partner, who I believe is a chemist, Michael Braungart, and they came up with this idea of looking at kind of literally uh, the way of operationalizing um, life cycle assessment in the design process. So looking at the whole life cycle of products and even services now. So Initial did a fair bit of work on this quite some time ago was Xerox, like with photocopiers and so forth. I personally have worked in this stuff in the area of gasoline in hydrocarbon-based fuels. So, like for instance, um, uh, the um, the renewable fuel standard. So when this was proposed in 2006, we had a group that I was working with wanted to take a look at that from a carbon standpoint, to look at the full carbon impact of gasoline, blended gasoline from the basically the source all the way to its combustion. So that's an example of how you'd look at something like where do you get the gasoline from, the wellhead emissions and so forth. And when you're blending it with where do you get the biofuel? And you look at the carbon intensity all the way through to transportation, sourcing, transportation, processing, delivery, and then use. I mean, that's like a good example of a process um, of life cycle assessment. So now that kind of thinking now, though, is becoming more prevalent today. And this is tied into the circular economy. Is everybody familiar with the circular economy? We've talked about it before. Everybody give me a thumbs up if you know about the circular economy. Yeah? So circular economy thinking is basically, like in a nutshell, for those that don't know about it, it's looking at how do we make the economy literally more circular in terms of reusing what we can, and then addressing the impacts of all the products that we use in our economic system from their inception and development through to their deployment at the end of life. So, I mean, that's kind of the thinking that we're doing when we think about circular economy. And the great thing is that that's becoming really popular now. And so we're going to have to start to think operationally more in those terms now, because when you do a circular economy, or proposing to have a circular economy, that every group, like every business and organization within that economy, also needs to think in those same terms. And this is where those that are in 415, the type of work that you're doing right now, literally this week, in reading about life cycle assessment, is going to be very helpful in fitting with that kind of movement. All right. So let's get into it. So one of the groups, and I've mentioned them before, but I'm going to mention them again and take a bit of a look at what they're doing in the product space right now, that's doing some neat stuff, is a company called Puma. Everybody familiar with Puma? Okay, I'm just going to get a link to their. So one of these, the thing with Puma is that what they've really embraced, the company, this company here, Puma. So now I know some of you know about this, particularly former students. Mona, you'd know about Puma. But Puma has, over the last 10 years, really kind of embarked on a new path. They are the ones that are kind of charting the path forward to become a leader in sustainable design and so forth and so on. So, and what this has manifested itself in is pretty remarkable work that they've been doing in quantifying their footprint. So they spend a lot of time looking at their inputs to their production. So if you take through their website, you can dig into this and look at all the different aspects of their sustainability program. Say, for instance, here, if you scroll down, using more sustainable materials, feel better and play better with the growing amount of alternatives used in Puma products. We're constantly striving to use more sustainable key materials such as cotton, polyester, leather, and cardboard. So you can go there and take a closer look at them and see what they're doing for sustainable materials. Like they have this leather working group. 90% leather originated from a tannery, which was awarded a metal rating by the Leather Working Group, seeks to improve the leather manufacturing industry by aligning with manufacturing priorities, etc. Cotton, the Better Cotton Initiative. Polyester, Blue Design, which is an environmentally friendly way of designing polyester. And then a few different recycled polyester. Their packaging is FSC certified. Their down is responsible down. So you think about it, I mean, there's a lot of different ways in which the stuff that they use to make their products can be quite negatively impacting the environment, right? So Puma, I can tell you, has been a company that's been looking closely at this whole idea of LCA within their operations, and it's quite interesting because they're not a fringe company. They're a pretty mainstream company, unlike, wait a lead, let's go Nike and Adidas. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I know some of you in 415 did one of your reports on Nike, which are all good, and like these are companies that need to get a handle on their impacts, because they're customer facing. So there's an interesting aspect of this, because you got to ask yourself what motivates a company to do what, right? So in the case of the consumer products, I mean, it's now becoming on vogue to be green, and they are really starting to lead the charge. So I would say that it's a trend that's not going to go away. So for what they do in terms of Puma, what I think is why I really highlight what they're doing is they not only do the LCA, so they're using a lot of recycled products, you know, a lot of alternative sourced materials and so forth and so on. And they really will take the lead in terms of how they, you know, how they quantify these impacts. So they measure a lot of the input products, but also the input materials that they're using, say water and energy and so forth, like you would for any kind of environmental impact assessment. Now, the next stage of this, and it's in 415, you'll read a bit more about this in the readings, is looking at that in the context of you know, in the context of economics. So what they are starting to do now is to look at how do we put pricing on this stuff, and this is where costing externalities and so forth really comes through. So yeah, it's a really exciting area, and we've mentioned this the other class, but where you can get this information though is through something called an EPL. Environmental profit and loss account. Okay, I'm gonna send a link through Puma EPL. Okay, environment. Here we go. Now, this is an old article, so take this with a, you know, just a grain of salt. But this is from a group called Environmental Leader. Okay, just one sec. Let me send through. So this is an article on the EPL that was started by Puma. Okay, so you know, this is how they have looked at their economic value of greenhouse gases, water, and other products. So what they do basically, and we can dig further into this in the classes, is they go and they do an impact assessment of their products to see, you know, how much water they use and how much cotton they use and to this, that, and the other thing they use. And then as a result of that, they then go and they then go and attach an economic value to those amounts. And those economic values are usually, at least right now, they're generated using something called TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. Okay. I'm going to send that through here. Okay. And with TEEB, basically TEEB is a framework that's established by economists and bankers that puts legitimate and credible economic values to ecosystem services. So now that if you can kind of imagine taking a more higher level view of this and look at the actual production of, say, sneakers or something like that, you can look at the impact of how you would say, okay, well, if we use this much water for this sneaker in a certain part of the world, say in Morocco or someplace like that, you can use the TEEB framework then to put a value on that. Now, if it's a lot easier to envision this if you think about greenhouse gas emissions, right? Because in greenhouse gas emissions, you know, you typically have a market signal for them depending on, you know, what type they are. But let's just say it's a certified one, right? Say a tradable CO2 emission in Europe. That will have a market value. I think it's about 20 something. I don't know what it is right now, but you find that out. So, I mean, that's the value that there exists for that particular externality in that area. And similarly, there's similar ways you can do that for, say, water and other parameters that go into the production of the different products. So that's how they do it. You know, they take an LCA approach to that. And then what this enables them to do is to have a much better idea of their environmental footprint, but also it also allows them to dig into their production. And this is quite interesting. Like, I met the CEO of Puma in 2012 and asked him about the program, like why they went about doing what they're doing. And the nuts and bolts of that are that he saw it more as a means of managing risks than anything else, which I found quite refreshing to hear from someone in that position. Typically, someone will say, oh, well, we thought it was the right thing to do, and we want to be a good global citizen, and, you know, blah, 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 that kind of stuff, which is all good. But he was a very practical guy, and he was saying, no, like, we need to focus on the we need to focus on the production of our products, and also understand where we're reliant on different things. So that is how they responded to this problem, and I think they've done a really good job of it. So if we look at what they're doing, I mean, that's kind of a big corporation that has a lot more, I guess, clout than other groups. So there are other organizations that are doing similar type of work. I wouldn't say to the same extent. One group that I'd like to draw your attention to is a group that helps with doing this kind of cost accounting. I'm just going to get the name of the group here. There we go. Here we go. So this is a company that really focuses on looking at the whole cost of things in general, but in, you know, ecosystems, environmental, social, ESG analysis, and looking at everything from the true cost impacts of major corporations to smaller operations. So if you take a look at this there, you will be able to get an idea of what they do. So if you take a look at that, you'll see that within their corporate advisory, this they have looking at climate change risks, SDG evaluation, corporate carbon pricing, and so forth. They can do impact measurement, sustainable supply value chains, but what they're really good at, though, is looking at exactly this whole kind of chain of production of a whole production process, and then putting costing to it. So yeah, take a look at what they're doing. True Cost is really good, and they've gotten a lot of steam, like picked up a lot of steam over the past while. True Cost. Another company that I think is really worth looking at in terms of this area is Levi's. Okay, is anybody familiar with the Levi's program? What they're doing in this area? Yes? No? Did you think that? How is LCA different from True Cost? Okay, so LCA, good. That's a good question. So LCA is the approach or an analytical method. That's the how you go about doing, like, a life cycle assessment is as a tool. It's a method for going about analyzing the life cycle of a product or service, right, from its inception all the way to the end. Whereas True Cost is a company that uses LCA as part of what they do, but they use other stuff as well, analytics and so forth, to analyze the true cost of products, services. They look at whole corporations and so forth. So they do an LCA, but they're also attaching economic value to that as well. And this is where it gets really interesting. LCA is not really a new thing. It's been around for a while, but you know, the process of putting costing to that is relatively novel. It's pretty new. Okay. So there we go. That is the process. True Cost, and so Levi's. Okay. Levi's is a company that has gone about. So do you see Levi's as a green company? Yes or no? No? Can denim, as in unaware, can denim truly be green? It can be green colored. No, as in unaware. Okay. Well, Levi's is an interesting one. I actually met the Levi's sustainability guy a while ago at the Globe conference, and And they have been really doing some awesome stuff. Um, so what's the biggest thing that that you would think the impact that a company like Levi's would have from an environmental standpoint? So we go pollution in water for sure. Water runoff, yeah. Dye, yes. I mean, it all revolves around the processing of their products, right? So, and so what they're aware of that, you know, because I mean, they run their company, they know what's going on. Um, so they developed this kind of um, process by which they developed what they call waterless clothes, waterless jeans. Okay, so I'm going to send through a couple articles here. Um, so here's one. Okay, this is actually from Flare magazine. Okay, there's one. But I want to point you to the actual um, they have developed this approach where they're trying to minimize as much as possible the use of water in their production of their products, right? So I'm just trying to find their main page here where they talk about that because it's really exciting what they're doing. Um, anyway, I'll find that and send it through in the notes. That'll be in the notes. But Levi's has been, and this is in a response to, again, like, why would they do this? Why would you think they would do this? What's the main reason? Okay, here's another article from The Guardian. Customer demand. Risk management could be part of it, but I'm thinking, I mean, I think it's more customer demand. That's kind of the impression that I'm getting. And here's another link here. All right, so have a look at those links. Um, yeah, so this is a really interesting program, and I foresee this happening more. So I think it's more about customer demand than anything else. I'm not convinced that it's about risk management in the case of Levi's, but I could be wrong. So I could be wrong about that. So now, how does this fit with LCA? Well, I mean, it is like this is by nature. You're doing an LCA in order to conduct that. Okay, so the LCA part of this would be looking at per unit, like per unit of production, how much water is going into. They have to quantify that all the way along the life cycle. There's another gene company called Nudie Genes. Have you heard of Nudie Genes? That has kind of a similar approach. Okay, so one of the other examples that I want to show you tonight is a group that I know of personally that is operating out of Montreal. And what they're doing is really interesting. And this is where I want to kind of get your input on where this might go. Okay, I'm just going to get you Lentinga. Okay, I'll explain to you what they're doing, and then I'm going to ask you, this is we're going to workshop together, how you think it's going to work. Okay, so she's doing amazing stuff. I know this person, Nina. So go to that website and have a look. Okay, so what does it say on the front page there? What's their thing? Using ocean plastic to make clothes. Exactly. So what they are doing is they've partnered with a group out of Italy. There's a company in Italy that makes the fabric, what the types of fabric that I think it's called here. Econol is one of the examples. If you go to this, yeah, here we go. So this here, if you go to this link here, this is the actual fabric. Boom. Okay, so what they're doing though is they are going out into the ocean and having fishing nets that have been discarded, recollected, and then converted into fairly high quality products. So it's really quite neat what they're doing, and they've got like Healthy Seas, 640,000 tons equals the weight of 61,000 blue whales. That's 640,000 tons of net that have been pulled out of the ocean. So if you look at that, the ghost fishing gear, and ghost fishing gear is a really it's a big problem, right? There's actually a group out of Vancouver that is doing this kind of work as well, recovering ghost nets, and then I don't know if they're turning into products yet or not. So this is where I want us to think about this, because this is the stuff that I'm working on. So they want me to look at this and say, okay, well, how can we put life cycle assessment to this? How do you think this will work? Like, do you think this will work? This whole idea of what they're doing. I mean, they're doing it. They're making products and all that kind of stuff. Do you think this is gonna kind of work well? You think this is the future? Yes. I wonder if they burn through the low-hanging fruit. Yeah, well, this is the issue. So the low-hanging fruit, easily to recover plastic. Yeah, this is my issue with it, is that mine some old landfills. I don't know how much of a source there is for what they're doing. You know, like I'm not sure if there's this endless supply of used fishing ghost gear out there or not. So they might have to start to look at other sources, partner with Nestle and have this. There we go. That's a good idea. So this is this kind of stuff that I have been thinking about. And the type of approach that we need to do is to find a different source that can supplement that. So the end products themselves, like I've actually seen their products, these masks they've made, and the bags and the tees and all this kind of stuff. If you look at through what they're doing, it's actually really high quality. It's really nice. Unlike other products out there, you know, it can, you know, sometimes these things aren't that nice. So I think there is potential here, but if we're kind of look at this from an overall life cycle assessment standpoint, we need to really, I mean, the reality of something like this is it needs to be operationally effective, right? You can have a good CSR story, so like know that there is a good kind of systematic approach to getting all this stuff done. However, at the end of the day, it's also got to make sense from a business standpoint and from like a technical standpoint. So my suggestion to them is to start to look at different sources, right? So this is where you start to look at what is the approach for doing an LCA, right? So for a fish net, I mean, you'd have to look at the impact of, you know, you're almost having a net benefit there because you're actually taking a waste product that was not being recovered before and then turning it into something new and usable. Whereas in other sources, like say, for instance, the used plastic bottles and so forth, you'd have to analyze that differently. So you see, you're starting with the source, and then you're going to follow that all the way through how much energy. So where might this be tricky, though? Like if you look at this from a carbon standpoint, how would this look like from a climate change standpoint, do you think? Like, is this a good thing for climate change? Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they could offset those things, but I might have to do exactly. See, this is what I wanted you to think about. On the surface, this looks like a great thing. However, at the end of the day, this really needs to be critically analyzed from cradle to grave. And there's only one way to do that, which is to really dig into it and do the analytics. So what I would say is this is where LCA makes a lot of sense. So you could calculate then the amount of energy and gas burned and all that kind of stuff to go and collect the nets and so forth and so on, and then go and gather them. And then also, what's the other part of this? Like if we're looking at just polyester that's created from normal processes, we'd have to look at what's the impact from actually grinding down, reprocessing, refabricating, and creating new fabrics, right? Like these new fabrics. So if you were to look at this from a carbon standpoint, and this is exactly the experience I had with the renewable fuel standard, on the surface, it was great. You know, the government was saying, oh, we're going to blend gasoline with whatever it was, 5 to 10%, or I forget what the percentage was, of biofuel, right? So this would be like something biofuel coming from corn-based ethanol or what have you. Whereas the problem there was, and there would be less greenhouse gas emissions at the end of the pipe when you burn it. The problem is that when this is done, you have a situation where the impact is you have an impacts that are greater in some cases because the source of the biofuel is you have the biofuel that is not readily available. And biofuel, they also did that to replace lead as an anti-knock. Sure. So the thing is, when you do a life cycle assessment, you have the source, which is in this case biofuel. I was just finding that some of the biofuel would have to come from Brazil, right? And some biofuel is very carbon intensive, like you're growing it in rainforest land, which otherwise would be a carbon sink, or you're you know, or even biofuel created from corn base is carbon intensive to some degree. So the moral of the story here then is, even when looking at Nina's business, you can only really get at the truth of the situation if you dig right into the details. You dig right into, okay, well, how many boats are out there collecting these fishing nets? How long are they working? How far are they traveling? How much energy does it take to pull in the fishing nets? Then where do the fishing nets get taken to? What is the process by which those fishing nets get converted into usable fabric, right? So there's a lot of these kind of things that we don't consider right off the bat. Now, in their case, it looks like they're offsetting a lot of these emissions, which is fair, but in other cases, they aren't. So some things that are green on the surface are not really, in essence, that green at all. So, you know, this is why, for those that are in 415, really, really understand and study the process of LCA. Now, if we were to go to the next step of this, for in the case of Nina's company, right, and we wanted to look at the full cost accounting side of this here, we would want to try and find a way to put economic value to that, right? So what is the cost economically of the greenhouse gas emissions? So if they're offsetting those emissions, there's obviously a cost to that. If they're carbon neutral or carbon negative, they're having to pay for the offsets. So all of those kind of economic side of it, as well as the environmental side, need to come together at some point in time. And where they tend to come together is in this whole process of kind of full cost accounting processes. All right, so there we go. Nestle sold their Canadian bottled water to a bottled water company in Shelburne. Maybe Nina can approach them, but sure, yeah, that's a good example. I'll forward that to them. So going forward, when we look at these situations, and I guess the big takeaway for me tonight for you is LCA is just like any other environmental management tool. It's like an impact assessment or what have you. It's only a tool, right? It's only a tool, but when used effectively and with precision, we can dig down and start to tease out specifics as to, how these things are working, and then what the true impacts are overall. And that is the process by which we will really end up finding out, what is the truth of any kind of situation from an impact standpoint. All right, so there we go. That's kind of as progressive as you're going to get with life cycle assessment right now. You can look at an effective use of LCA with the T process and really come up with some interesting findings. Do you guys have any questions? Do you know of any other companies that are doing stuff remotely like this? Patagonia. Good question, actually. So here's Patagonia's website. Rivian is using ocean plastics to build crates for their factories for cars. Okay, interesting. Patagonia is the one that, there is a company out there that everybody refers to in the environment space. It's this one. It's Patagonia. And they're doing a great job. I mean, they encourage you to buy less products and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, they're a really good one to look at. Patagonia is good. I know that Arc'teryx as well. So a lot of the mountaineering, mountain equipment and outdoor, the outdoor life brands are doing stuff like this. Wetsuits. Who's the wetsuit one? Are you saying? Patagonia. I didn't know they made wetsuits actually, but let me look. Kite surfing, fly fishing. Okay. Okay. Very interesting. So Patagonia is a good one. So these are some things that are happening right now with this, and those in 415 and those in 322. This feeds into this whole idea of what the ecological imperative is. So how are we going about formulating an approach that to conduct our economic affairs and our production that can minimize the impact on the environment, yet at the same time meet our economic requirements. Okay, so there we go. That is where things are at roughly with consumer products and LCA. It's a new wave. This is what is happening right now. It's not fiction. When I first started in this area back in 2000, 98, 99, a lot of this stuff was fictional. It's like we talked about it, we'd read Cradle to Cradle, and we'd read these books and say, wow, that'd be great if that actually happened. And now it's actually happening, and it's actually happening at it's pretty significant scale, like companies like Levi's, the Patagonias, the Arc'teryxes, and so forth. So it's pretty exciting to see it actually working right now. It's becoming the norm. You know, there's a company called Interface Carpets. Do you all know about Interface Carpets? They are one you need to know about. Okay, I'll end with Interface Carpets. Okay. So Interface is the group that is, you know, it is the group that that is really leading the charge, or that has led the charge and opened the door to a lot of this kind of collaboration. And they are the ones that that really have opened the door. They were the ones that started this at scale. Their CEO was driving it. He was a private sector guy. It's a privately owned company, and they decided at one point just to really push forward and become as minimal impact as they could on the environment, and have then led the way. I mean, they demonstrated that carpeting could be have zero impacts, and in fact, and then they've made more money doing this. They've made more money with their carpet tile and so forth. So I think I've included their his link in terms of Ray Anderson is his name. Now this is one you should watch. Here, the business logic of sustainability. So, okay, so here is your last link for tonight. Didn't he design it to look like the forest floor? I think some of them maybe. There, if you that's your homework going out of this is watch that YouTube video. Um, um, yeah, that's the one. I mean, he talks closely um, about his inspiration for doing this and the tremendous success that they have realized. So there you go. I mean, that's your homework. Take a look at that. Walking out of that is, I mean, an example of someone who had a vision of where things can go and then executed on it. And it, you know, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. He's done a phenomenal job. So there we go. That is the lesson tonight, or the topic for tonight. Kind of a little more informal this time around, just because I wanted to kind of use more practical stuff rather than academic stuff, because this is really practical. These are practical examples and practical things that are happening. So have a look at that, and then go from there. Any other questions? So at least you know who's doing what on this area right now, and that there are good things happening. The way of the future is this. You're going to get this used all across the economy now. I guarantee you. Even in oil and gas, forestry, mining, everything.